Welcome to the revolution. This is Slim and Kiki on the Minority Report. We're a progressive group drawing grassroots attention through reflective insight and commentary to the most important issues facing the world today.
Knowledge is the most powerful asset in the world today, and that is why we bring you the Minority Report. We are going to level the socioeconomic playing field in the world today to help you be the best you can be, to motivate and inspire progressive, innovative, grassroots change for humanity all around the world.
So who are we? I'm Slim, and you just heard from Kiki. I'm a lawyer practicing in the state of Texas. Before I was a lawyer, I was a progressive young kid that started a nonprofit called the Coalition for Violence Prevention while I was getting a degree in psychology and corrections. My focus during undergrad was primarily in criminal justice reform. I'm a published researcher that has been cited internationally in the fields of criminology, psychology, corrections, and abnormal psychology. And I currently have a practice that focuses primarily on civil and criminal litigation. I'm a member of the ABA, an active member, and a member of the Texas State Bar, the Northern District of Texas, the Eastern District of Texas, the Fifth Circuit, and the United States Supreme Court. What I hope to do with the podcast is give people an idea of what major issues are facing our country today and the world today, and hopefully provide some insight, both legally and from a psychological perspective, on what we can do together to change the trajectory of where society is going at this point in time. My hope is that I would love to see more people get involved in the progressive movement, especially with regard to some of the innovative thoughts and movements regarding criminal justice reform, but also just instilling a little bit more humanity back into the world. And that's what I hope this podcast will do. Kiki, who are you?
That was really well said. Well, I am a high school senior, and basically I am taking this class, and in the class we can research whatever career field that we want to go into, and I specifically chose criminal law. So in this, we are able to have, like a mentor. So Slim is actually my mentor, and we have been able to connect on a lot of important issues, and that's why we have this podcast right now. So what I want to see for the future and just right now is change in the most equitable way possible, because the world we're living in right now is there's a lot of injustices, and it's crazy because, I'll sit here on my desk, doing homework, and it makes me feel really hopeless sometimes, where I feel like I'm not doing anything. And I know that there's a lot of people that feel the exact same way that I do. And I just want to get involved with, first of all, supporting grassroots organizations. That's a great way to begin with. But also just keeping it for the future, making the future a better place. And there's a lot of problems that we need to fix. There's a lot of change that needs to happen. And it's just about starting now, which I really learned through Slim. Thank you so much. But that's something that, I learn now. And when I'm older, I really want to get into more, activism. And also, I've always been interested in the field of law. So I want to pursue a law degree and go into law and become an attorney representing real clients and hearing about their stories. And I just know that it will not only impact me, but if I continue the way everything that if I hope to achieve in the future, I'm hoping that it will also educate other people around me by just hearing some of the stories of people in everyday lives, what they face. And yeah.
That's great, Kiki. I have high
Thank
hopes for
you.
you.
Thank
You're
you.
me, right? So,
Thank you.
what is the Minority Report? Well, that's something that I like to reference in regard to the movie Minority Report, where you see a whole film dedicated to what's called predictive policing. And that is a new evolutionary event that you're seeing across the country, where people in the policing industry are trying to prevent crime before it happens. And that's a whole topic unto itself. We'll take some time later on in the year to discuss what the issues with that are, in particular, the constitutional problems that arise from allowing police to police the community in that way. But with regard to how we're using the word Minority Report, we are looking at newsworthy insights and commentary on the most pressing world issues today. So we may talk about criminal justice reform, the death penalty, climate change, some of the international issues with regard to decriminalizing drugs, and on and on and on. And each week, we are going to have a new topic. We may at times have guest speakers. So we'll be sure to inform you of who might be a guest on an upcoming show. But primarily it's just going to be Kiki and I talking informally about whatever the progressive platform is for grassroots change, based on the issues that we find interesting in the world today. We are going to air this podcast every Saturday from 12 to 1 on Spotify to enlighten, inform, inspire change in the world through a free, interactive, fully integrated social media podcast. We also have set up ways for you to participate in the podcast, let your insight and thoughts be known, and to be a contributor to see the change in the world that you want to see. Our dreams are to motivate listeners into leaders that think, be, do, and have all the things humanitarianism has to offer. In the last 4 years, without naming names, I'm going to say that we have had some less than adequate leadership in this country, and that has led to America sort of coming off the rails a little, and we really need to get back to center, in my opinion, and part of that is getting in touch with humanitarianism, and so hopefully our program will help y'all think and be and do and have things that are more aligned in that regard. Discuss how you can get involved in the program at the end of each program, and we strongly advise and encourage you to make your opinions known and to stretch your thoughts and to be open-minded as we go through and talk about and dialogue about the different issues that arise each week. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Right. We're back with Slim and Kiki. Kiki, you're going to talk about Oregon's House Bill 110.
Yes.
Tell me all about that. What is that about?
Okay, so just to begin with, just for some kind of background information, Oregon decriminalized drug possession, and it became the first state in the United States to do that this year. And that's a crazy move for change to happen in the criminal justice system, because as we know, we get confused with how much power, the police can have. But I think just it's a step to realize that drug problems, anything, medical related that is related to your health, should remain as a health problem and not for, you know, something that you're supposed to punish people for. It should be something that people need help, and I think it's a great step to starting that. So basically, the way this got passed was it's called Measure 110, and it got voted yes by about 58%. So that's a pretty close tie, I would say, like pretty close, you know, 50, almost to 50-50. But the fact that we have that extra 8% is just so much hope already. So in Oregon, there's been a lot of past drug problems, and you know there have been racial disparities in drug arrests, and with this Measure 110 passing, there's predictions that, you know, the racial disparities in these drug arrests could drop by 95%, which is a lot. And of
Now,
course
wait,
those
hang on,
of
Kiki. Let me ask you a question.
Mhm.
That
Yeah,
stat, that stat came from the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission, correct?
right.
Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the Oregon Criminal Justice
Yeah,
Commission, because
go for it.
I actually worked there back in the 90s.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission is a nonpartisan group um, of,
Hmm.
of of appointed people that have. When I was there, we worked on the Oregon sentencing guidelines that followed the
Hmm.
federal sentencing guidelines, which was a really big deal back then, and had to do with the war on drugs, and it took away a lot of the discretion that judges had
Hmm.
in sentencing certain offenses. And the operation of the Criminal Justice Commission is to research and report to the governor and to the governor's advisory boards, which I have sat on in Oregon, um,
Hmm.
about different issues within the community that revolve around progressive reform in the criminal justice system. Oregon actually is the most progressive criminal justice reform state in the country and has been for the last almost 40 years.
Wow, yeah.
And it is notorious for passing legislation just like this idea of decriminalizing all drugs.
Hmm.
And the way that they get it done is through a nonpartisan um, position of providing accurate statistical data
Hmm.
on things like convictions and projections on convictions, and just how a certain piece of legislation, if enacted, will affect the people in Oregon.
Yeah.
It's one of the only states that has that type of nonpartisan commission, and it's been very effective over the last several years. So keep on going forward, Kiki, on
Hmm.
explaining this law. I just wanted to intervene there for a minute and provide a little context.
Yeah, no, and also just like a really quick response to that, how you were talking about this is like a nonpartisan measure, I guess. That's really great because I feel like a lot of issues that happen right now are seen as political issues, when if you just take a glance at what the issue is actually talking about, it's like a matter of like basic, whether it be like, you know, a more serious topic about like basic human rights versus just having common sense, honestly. So that's really good that, you know, we were able to get a uniform opinion, like a uniform kind of way of going about this, especially because the state of Oregon has some of the highest rates of substance abuse in the nation and among the poorest rates of access to services. So the fact that, you know, this measure was passed, this is in the future, this is going to help with the rates of substance abuse. And actually there's statistics and information that show that you know, there's been other countries that have done things like this, like Portugal is one of them. And after, you know, making it decriminalizing drugs, drug use rates in Portugal were lower than the average rates in Europe and far lower than those in the United States. So if you just look at different countries or different places where this kind of, this kind of stuff is being practiced and you see a positive trend, I think that's just more of an incentive to do it here, And it's just works so holistically for all aspects. I was talking about how the amount of racial disparities in drug arrests could drop by 95%. So that's one aspect. And then we also have an aspect talking again about Portugal, how the total amount of drug deaths fell while the number of people treated for drug addiction in the country rose for 20%. So that just shows that if you are given the opportunity, if you are given, the resources to improving, it will happen, there will be positive impacts based on what you see or what you pass. And there was also, mhm,
Kiki, I got to stop you right there because
yeah,
you're giving me a flashback to back when I was 21,
yeah, go
around
for
your
it.
age, and
Yeah.
I was young and full of optimism and curiosity,
Hmm.
and I did a bunch of yard work to raise $800 to travel and backpack across Europe, and
Wow.
I spent 21 days over there, and part of my trip was in Amsterdam. And
Oh yeah.
I'll tell you what, back then, again, that was back in the 90s, late
Right.
90s, and it was something else, boy, to walk into those coffee shops where they sold marijuana just right over the
No
counter,
way.
and mushrooms, and people would walk up to you on the street and say, "Hey,
Oh
you
my
want
gosh.
ecstasy? You want this? You want that?" And at no time during my whole trip in Amsterdam did I ever feel unsafe. It was a real dichotomy, because in America, when you go, back then, when you would go to buy drugs or
Hmm.
have you, it was always in a slummy neighborhood, in a trash
Yeah.
house,
Very sketch,
they're
yes.
selling all kinds of drugs. And in Amsterdam, it just seemed so normalized that it was something that I'd never experienced in my life, and it opened my mind to think that,
Hmm.
maybe this idea of legalizing marijuana isn't such a bad thing, and
Yeah.
it's interesting because my dad's been a drug and alcohol counselor in Oregon for
Hmm.
45 years, and he has very specific views about legalizing. Back in the day when we were talking about legalizing marijuana in Oregon, he actually thought it would be beneficial for a lot of
Oh.
different reasons that we'll get
Hmm.
into later. Um, but it definitely, that trip, I'll never forget it. It was one of those iconic memories that I have about, being a teenager, or, just after my teenage years, where I got
Yeah.
to experience a completely different culture and see life from a completely different world, and realize,
Yeah.
maybe we don't have it right all the time here in the United States. Maybe, you know, criminalizing, um, like you said, healthcare matters, or
Hmm.
addiction matters, is doing nothing but, making us more unsafe than safe.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And that like kind of reminds me of this idea I was thinking about a few weeks ago. Is like how uh like the government or the system, it usually, like, it works to instill fear among people so they don't, do this one thing again, get in more trouble. But I don't think people realize, or, people that are supporters of all of this, I don't think they realize that it's just going to make them like more secretive, I guess, afraid instead of, seeking help. It's just like that was like something I was like, wow, it's more about the fear rather than working with the people or for the people.
So you're thinking maybe it drives people underground more?
Yeah, like how you were saying, if you wanted to purchase some sort of drug here, I'm sure it would be like in a very sketchy alley or something,
Right.
definitely where people don't know. So like, how did it get that way? Like,
Yeah.
why isn't it like in Amsterdam, where people are just walking around offering all of this stuff, you know?
Right. Right.
So
That's
it's just like you can,
that's an interesting concept. It's criminalizing a behavior that, who's the victim, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
who really is the victim here? So, um, and of course the state's taken that on because, quite frankly, the government's one of the biggest drug pushers in the world, right? The U.S.
Yeah.
government has pushed drugs for
Yes.
quite some time. They've pushed
Yeah.
it on the military. They've pushed it on their international relations. They've been quite the it's been quite the hypocrisy for some time, and that kind of gets me into
Mhm.
the war on drugs that started back in the 70s and really picked up in the 90s, and
Yeah.
when Clinton passed um, the I can't remember what the War on Drug Act or something to that effect, and
Yeah, it was like
that
a drug
back
law.
then, there was some research. It's been debunked since then, but I can remember sitting in my college classes learning about what was called the super predator, and
Mhm.
it was a concept that I really was baked into my college education because it was so terrifying to think that because back in the 70s we started programs like welfare and public housing and all this stuff that now 20 or 30 years later we had third and fourth generation welfare recipients that were raising, they were kids raising kids that didn't have, solid upbringings to begin with, that were raising
Mhm.
kids in these ghetto environments and didn't have the moral structure to teach these kids right from wrong, which then allegedly was supposed to have created what we called the super predator at the time. And there were some people that would point to behaviors that you could see at a really early age, like kindergarten and first grade, where the kids were acting so oppositional and defiant. I remember a story from one of my professors. They talked about this little 6-year-old boy went up to the teacher in the middle of class and asked to go to the bathroom. She said, can you please wait until we're done talking here? And he
Mhm.
went ahead and peed on her leg.
Oh
And
my gosh.
and it was a story that was so shocking back then because you rarely heard of kids at that age behaving in that sort of manner. And so you can only assume where a college student's brain goes with that kind of information. Like, oh my God, we're going to raise kids that turn out to be, serial killers, and at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
over time, that theory was actually debunked mostly by um, uh, the National Criminal Justice Statistics um, Commission that studies and reports nationally all of the um, criminal stats, the convictions, the rates of convictions for different offenses, and over time, we actually saw crime did go up,
Mhm.
and violent crime did go up, and drug offenses went up, obviously, because they were focused on those, and there was, mandatory minimums, and we came out with 3-strike laws and all this stuff, and so, but then eventually, in the late 2000s, the crime rate started, the violent crime rates started going down. And yet we
Mhm.
had all of these people that we had incarcerated over time for what might otherwise be considered a public health issue, a drug offense.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and so um, what actually started to trend was commercializing corrections, and you found the government in different states starting to contract with companies like Walmart, uh, and things like that to build
Mhm.
and house these offenders, because we were arresting and convicting people in record numbers, and the 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 cost to the states was exponential. Taxes went up dramatically. The disparity in sentencing was enormous.
Mhm.
The crack epidemic that came in and wiped out, entire boroughs of certain cities. Where people were just constantly either being sentenced to long-term sentences, sometimes in some instances life sentences, in three strike states, for what is otherwise deemed a health issue.
Yeah.
And so that's when, at the same time, that's when sentencing guidelines were kicking in, and we weren't giving judges the opportunity to do anything less than sentence from a punishment range. And how that worked was a grid system, and it depended on their criminal history. They got ranked based on their criminal history on the horizontal axis, and on the vertical
Mhm.
axis was the offense, and each offense, depending on the I guess uh, uh, not effectiveness, but the harmfulness of each offense, whether it was to self or others, had you would grid it out so that, if somebody had 3 prior offenses and they were charged with, delivery and manufacturing, then you're looking at, a pretty substantial sentence, maybe 120,
Yeah.
240 months. So, and you start counting out those months, and that's a good handful of years, that you're going to end up spending time in prison. And so more recently, um, the the federal government has walked away from sentencing guidelines and allowed judges to have more discretion over sentencing, and they've been more reformative with regard to just this idea of mass incarceration for drug offenses. Some
Mhm.
states are getting better. Obviously, you're talking about Oregon, who's gone, you know, the totally opposite way, and
Yeah.
decriminalize drugs. And then there's states, that are still uh, lacking. Not many of the northern states, but like down here in Texas, um,
Yeah.
you can get a pretty heavy sentence for a possession charge, um, and even a marijuana charge, and where, in Texas more than 50% of the population wants to legalize marijuana, yet we're convicting people that have possession of marijuana for terms of, years. And,
Mhm.
and then, when once you start housing them in the correctional facilities, because it costs so much to house them, there's no money for treatment, and
Yeah.
so it becomes a revolving door, if they're even allowed to get out of the system. And so,
Yeah.
um, with that, we'll take another break, and welcome your questions and your thoughts. But for now, we're going to let our sponsors indoctrinate you on the next marketable thing you can't live without, and we'll listen to a little music. So we're back. Kiki,
Hey.
what are the you talked a little bit about the stats,
Mhm.
that you read about. What other stats did they have?
Yeah, okay. So I'm not sure. I don't think I read this earlier, but there was a statistic that talked about how many people are going to be actually convicted of a drug possession when you like convicted of felony or misdemeanor. And it states that there's about 3,700 fewer Oregonians. I don't know how to say that. Yeah. So 3,000 fewer Oregon people will be convicted of felony or misdemeanor possession of the controlled substances because the measure has been passed. And that's, that might not seem like a huge, that is actually a huge number, but it might not seem like a huge number to a lot of people considering the very, very large prison population that we have right now. But even like just one state doing that is just, that itself is a really big change. And if you look at this like over time, the after like the measure is actually I guess like worn in, quote unquote worn in, like it's being practiced fully. I know that there will be other amazing numbers that are gonna match up to this. And there's also kind of just like talking about how the bill works in general. So with this measure 110, basically if you're caught or something, you're gonna have to pay $100 fine and attend an addiction recovery program. So that's how the bill works. And if you look at the cost of trying to you're on trial, whatever, you're going to prison, all of this stuff, you can see like how the funding works when you're passing a bill like this, passing like measure 110, like something like this. And it's funded by several taxes. I'm trying to find that. I think it was like the cannabis tax is one of them. I
Right,
think that
right.
is where they
I
get their
read about
funding
that
from.
too. Yeah, I read about
Yeah.
that too. I thought that was brilliant, right? Because
Yeah, that is. It's
from,
crazy.
yeah, if your state has passed a marijuana tax and has made it socially acceptable to smoke marijuana, then it makes sense from a sociological perspective that
Mhm.
the people that should be paying for the rehab are the same people that are in the cohort that find that behavior socially normal. And the interesting thing that I find is if you look at and analogize it to some of the network research that's been done in social psychology on smoking cessation.
Mhm.
There's 3 degrees of separation in those studies that showed over time longitudinally that depending on your when you look at a network of people, meaning your friends, your family, your coworkers, your social uh, associates and that type of thing, and there's 3 degrees of separation for um, effectively in this particular study stopping smoking at the same time. So that
Mhm.
means that in that study you were 67% more likely to quit smoking if your husband quit smoking. You were 47% more likely to quit smoking if your best friend stopped smoking. And then you were 27% more likely to quit smoking if a coworker stopped smoking. And if you relate that logic or that science, which was statistically um, it was statistically important. It had an error rate of less than 0.05%.
Mhm.
So it was reliable research. And you apply it to this situation, um, you know, marijuana users are not going to want their marijuana tax to go up, and yet they will because they're using marijuana in most instances, they will know somebody who is also using potentially other drugs like methamphetamine or cocaine
Mhm.
or benzos or whatever. And there's the possibility under this theory that because the marijuana users don't want their tax to go up, that can actually effectuate succession in drug use of harder drugs because they don't want to continually be putting their people that are in their network into expensive drug rehabs. And so, to
Mm.
the extent that you could have some form of social change because you're taxing the cost of recovery to the same cohort that finds the behavior socially normal,
Mm-hmm.
I think that that is probably one of the most brilliant parts of the legislation,
Yeah.
because it does not tax the people that are non-users. It taxes
Mm-hmm.
the people that are users and find the behavior
Exactly.
to be acceptable. And so I find that to be, I think over time you're going to find that to be extremely successful,
Mm-hmm.
and allowing that social cohort to monitor and regulate and dictate the social norms within itself, I think speaks volumes to the amount of trust that the Oregonians have in their independent social networks, being able to um, have some sort of social control over certain behaviors. So
Yeah.
I think in that light, it's extremely progressive, um,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot like what you see happening in some of the countries that you talked about. The Netherlands, Portugal, that sort of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
that was just my 2 cents on that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And you know how you were talking about like that three-tier kind of thing. I was reading like the cannabis laws that Oregon has, and it basically says that, people that use it for their own personal, like recreational users, they can't smoke in a public place, which is like including hotels, schools, obviously, streets, like when you're outside, it's to your own. It's kind of like you're giving these people their own privacy, but also having there's like an outcome to this because the I think like the base tax for recreational weed use, just like how California has it, is 17%. So that's like the base rate for tax. So all of this tax money, the people that are using marijuana or whatever drugs they're using, it's going to be redistributed to like uh, school funds, mental health facilities. There's this one like mental health, alcoholism, and drug services, to the state police and more. So it's like a loop, but you're doing something that's helping everyone, I guess, but also benefiting those who actually use it personally, because we have actual it's like they're using their own money to fund their addiction recoveries or whatever happens.
Exactly. They're
Yeah.
having to use their own money to fund their addiction recovery, and and
Yeah.
and what better way to hold that cohort accountable, right? And
Yeah,
socially accountable.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna take a quick break. Okay, we're back. So we just spoke about the sociology of and the backdrop of the Measure 110 and some of the social psychology aspects of it. But what I'm real curious about, Kiki, is
Mhm.
what exactly is, I'm much older than you, so I'm definitely stepped away from the teen drug culture.
Yeah.
I don't have, my experimentation days were 35 years ago. So,
Yeah.
what? Tell me what's happening now? What are your friends
Okay,
doing? What's
yeah.
the culture like?
Okay, so I'll go in chronological order. So I'll kind of start at middle school, which was, a few years ago. So back in middle school, it was like, it was known that people, use drugs even in middle schools. I know there was like a few students that even got caught and they had to like, they got in some legal trouble with that. But so that's kind of where it started, and then on to high school. It's just honestly seen, if I were to hear, someone using a drug that's probably now you would get in severe punishment for, I wouldn't be surprised at all, because it's like the culture of drugs is seen as something cool, like there's a lot of people that push this idea that, oh yeah, like I'm using drugs, I'm cool. That's why like so many people also kind of fall into that uh alley, I guess, that area. And my friends, the whole entire drug thing, that's not for me and my friends. Like we don't really do that stuff. So, but we will, like, see a lot of people that do, and we won't be surprised because it's just seen as a norm now. And this can be because of various reasons. Like, first of all, in high school, a lot of people, we know that teens take drugs to maybe kind of hold up that school stress or even like family stress. Or it could be like seeing your own parents taking drugs and you falling into that trap through that, or seeing your friends and your like friends are like, yeah, like come on, like take a hit, it's cool. And then you go into that and all the parties and all of that stuff. So it's kind of just like
So,
there's so many aspects of it,
so is it like a cultural phenomenon? Like are most of the
um
kids in your school doing drugs? And what kind of
you
drugs are they
know
doing?
so I wouldn't say it's like most kids are doing it, because I know there's a lot of people that also they're not into that stuff, but maybe they do, like drink or something like that with their parents, even like under their guidance, or not guidance, what's it called? Consent. But I would say like the kind of drugs, I don't think it gets too bad. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was about some of the drugs that we're talking about, like weed. That's definitely 100%. I know it for sure that there's a good amount of people just in my school, not even going into like districts,
Hmm.
and other schools in my district. It's
Yeah.
very, very common. Parties, there's a lot of partying that happens, and I know that in those, there's definitely a lot of people that bring stuff. They have links, so they just kind of share it, and it's also they make profit off of it. It's like a whole umbrella, and
Right.
the thing is, there's like so many parts to it, and I feel like I was actually writing about this in one of my like research things, and I was saying how like we have rehabilitation centers kind of have like this opinion on them, where it's like when you're, if you, let's just say I was like suffering with a drug problem, and that was because of my own stress, and let's just say I had to go to a rehab center. I would probably, the most common way of approaching that is you're very skeptical and you're like resisting that change, right? And I think that's a very common pattern among teens now, is just like resisting and trying not to get caught, just being in your own little like private world. And I'm all about like do what you want, but I think like there is a point of time where if you need help, it's really important that you take that help. And I just think that like rehabilitation centers, they don't have as much of a good like opinion, like what's it called, like they don't have as much of a
Reputation.
good, yeah, reputation as they should have, because they work very well for a lot of people, but we don't really hear about that as much. I think
Hmm.
we should be exposed as just like teens in general to
Uh-huh.
more of that.
Oh, so
So
like
yeah.
so do you guys not have like classes that you take on drug prevention or anything?
Um, I don't even think my school has any, to be honest. It's just more of like, so there's like homeroom, where you just have like a period of time, about like, 30 minutes, where you're sent to a teacher's class, and uh then maybe they'll play some sort of drug prevention videos, but it's also like, I think it's also the part of the officials, that it's not like enforced or anything, it's just
Right.
seen as, yeah, like listen if you wanna. And I get that. Like, I'm gonna be honest, I definitely tune out to those kind of videos too. But I guess it's more of just like how to appeal. So instead
Yeah.
of maybe taking that like visual video approach, doing something else, making it more just kind of lifting the
Interactive or
reputation off.
hmm.
Yeah, like when if officials are to present a video like this, you know, a lot of students would probably just be like, whatever, like be on their phones, you know? It's
Yeah.
because, you know, they're required. It's obvious that officials are required by the district to show us this video. It's not
Yeah.
even like for our help. It's literally for like guidelines or something, you know?
Yeah. Okay, so we had a momentary blip in recording there, but we're back. And Kiki, I was asking you, um, you know, in your research on Measure 110,
Mm-hmm.
is there an age limit that it applies to? Like, is it decriminalizing all drugs for people over the age of 21, or does
Yeah.
it decriminalize drugs for people of all ages?
Yeah, so basically, there was another measure that was passed. I think it was earlier than Measure 110. And basically, it permits adults 21 and older to purchase and possess marijuana. That's in specific. So it does have like an age limit. So I'm guessing that, like, if you were to, if the law, you know, once the measure, obviously the measure is passed actually, but if, you know, a teen is to get caught up into this, I'm sure that the, you know, the tax, the purpose of the cannabis tax and like the purpose of the measure is to move in the direction of help rather than punishment. So I'm sure if there was like, you know, a teen that was getting caught up in drugs, I'm sure they would be able to, you know, get actual help rather than
Mhm.
get punished for it. And that's
Gotcha.
huge. Yeah. And it's
Okay.
also like just like another thing about this, about like the cannabis tax in general. If you are out in public or anything, or if you have like, you know, if you're possessing some sort of drug, you need to have an ID on you, even at home. Um, Even like if you're trying to purchase it in a place, it's very important to have an ID for the proof of age. So it's, I mean, obviously that's kind of just like a, yeah, like obviously you need an ID kind of thing, but I also think that's equally, I guess, important, adds more to the entire act in general.
You know, one of the things my dad said to me today when I
Mm-hmm.
was talking to him about this was, you know, if we're gonna do this, uh, you know, it should be after the teen brain has developed, and it, you know, research has indicated that it takes, you know, the teenage brain doesn't fully develop until age 25 to 27.
Yeah.
So that's the frontal lobe area of your brain, which affects a lot of different things: personality, motivation,
Yeah.
um, different stuff like that. So, and his thought process was, you know, if you're too young and you're smoking pot in particular, as a habitual behavior, that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you could become very apathetic and unproductive and end up having other issues in life, like dropping out of high school, or you know, high sexual behavior
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, leads to pregnancy later, and other behaviors that change the trajectory of the kid's life. And so if we're going to have this law that, you know, decriminalizes all drugs, we should do it after the teenage brain is fully developed. And so I think his
Yeah.
point was to advocate, you know, that in particular with marijuana, drugs, you know, well, not hard drugs, but in particular with marijuana has less of an effect on an adult brain than it does on a teen brain.
Right.
And so, you know, in that regard, putting limitations around people's use that way also promotes public health and safety. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's true too when you start talking about drugs like methamphetamine and heroin and some of these harder opiates and
Yeah.
stuff like that, because you know, when you start flooding the brain with dopamine and the behavior that follows with that, biochemical change in the brain of a child, of a teenage child,
Mm-hmm.
you can get really unpredictable behavior. And I'm not saying that it doesn't happen in adults either, but with the developing brain, it can be much more problematic, I guess.
Yeah.
So it made sense to me what he was saying, that, you know, if you made it legal after everybody's brains are on the same page, that
Yeah.
you might not have as many problems. So,
Yeah.
what um, what do you think about duplicating this type of legislation in, Oregon's obviously the norms up there are very different, right? Than
Right.
the people are very different than the people maybe down south.
Hmm.
And have you lived in Texas your whole life?
I have not. I lived in Nebraska for the first 13 years. So I moved here when I was in eighth grade.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. What a
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, it was a crazy change.
um, so you have some perspective then of the difference
Yeah.
between the North and the South. And
Hmm.
do you think a law like this, assume for a minute with me here,
Hmm.
that a law like this could actually pass in a state like this?
Uh-huh.
Do you think that it would be as effective in a state like Texas or Mississippi or Alabama?
Mm.
Or do you think, is there such big cultural differences in the South versus the North, that this isn't something that could be duplicated?
Yeah. So Oregon, it's like I feel like if you were to have, just like a normal perception, like before I didn't even know anything about Oregon decriminalizing drugs, how big of a change that is. I didn't even know that, right? So like states like Texas, where you have so many people and so many like heavily populated cities like Dallas, Austin, Houston, I feel like it would definitely be a lot harder to enforce, especially because in a state like here, I like to think Texas is it's very divided within like the suburbs. There's a lot of division already in Texas. Not like don't even take the United States into consideration, just Texas alone, right? So I think that there would be a lot of resistance to this, and people wouldn't be I guess like people wouldn't be open to seeing the effects of this because I also think there's just a lot of people that aren't educated on um, the impacts that drugs can have and how they relate to the justice system in specific. So if this were to get passed, I think that would be an amazing change and it definitely would help a lot of people. But I do see there would be like resistance and it would take a little time to like kind of make society accept it as well, like make society
Right.
make the police actually too, it's
Hmm.
also their it's from their perspective as well. They're not going to go no longer go looking for like people that have drug or possessing drugs, right, unless they're in public or
Hmm.
something.
Hmm.
And so that itself is like a huge change for police. And I think like generally the South, there's it's weird. It's just like I feel like a lot of people are ignorant and they only have like one source of information, like one stream of information, and it comes from a very unreliable source and very biased as well.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
it's like a perception, that it's just like a perception that will take years to change.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it would definitely be a little more resistant. The people in specifically like Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, those, southern states, it would definitely be more resistance. But I feel like Texas, just like going on a more political basis, we've seen some very close calls within what kind of route we're taking for the future, right? In this election that we had, we saw some pretty close numbers, I would say. But
Hmm.
I think that, in the end, we have that, we have something that happened. And you would still have that other 50% of the state that is unwilling to move forward in a direction like this.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people also bring up the economic aspect. So they're going to be magically concerned about the cannabis tax, and it's like a tax that they don't really have enough information about, but they're
Yeah.
already just going to resist it just by the name of it, the cannabis tax.
Right.
And they're
Right.
going to be like, why are you taking my money to help some random person get drug rehab, whatever?
Right. They don't see the connection. It's okay for me to do
Yeah,
it, but it's not okay for you to do it. Yeah, you
exactly.
get a lot of that hypocrisy down here.
Yeah.
And it does come from a lot of misinformation and just like you said, not to speak ill of Southerners, but ignorance and sort of this blind faith belief in
Mm-hmm.
whatever snake oil the most charismatic person is selling, down
Yeah.
here. And
Mm-hmm.
and so it's not really founded in or grounded in any sort of methodological, research based, statistically proven, um, think tank
Yeah.
that's pushing out, some of the best research in the country. A lot of um, the decisions down here are are made based on, I hate to say it, but corrupt relationships. And,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's a very corrupt system down here. And so, they'll oftentimes, the pack will follow the leader that uh, makes no sense to somebody who
Yeah.
hasn't been born and raised here. And so
Exactly.
I certainly understand that perspective, and I agree with you on that. I think it'd be a hard sell. But
Yeah.
I have hope. I mean,
Yeah.
there's more Democrats popping up down here because of the influx of people that have moved here from the north. And
Yeah.
as somebody who moved here from the north, you know, it's been a shell shocking experience over the last 10 years, dealing with some of the people that you would, if you were up north, you would otherwise expect them to have a certain knowledge base that just doesn't translate down here. And
Exactly.
and so we're going to take one last break and turn it over to the sponsors so they can sell you something great, and we'll be right back. We are back. It's Slim and Kiki, and we are going to wrap up this session on measure 110 and what we think you should expect going forward. Um, I'll just say this. Oregon has a long history of being the most progressive criminal justice reform state in the country. It was one of the first to enact the CAHOOTS program, which was a mental health response, emergency mental health response team that's unarmed. And that program is a pilot project that came out of Eugene, Oregon last year, I believe, in response to some of the police brutality that people were seeing across the country and the need for there to be a more moderate intervention when you're dealing with mental health patients in the criminal justice system. And so, I grew up there and lived there most of my life, and what I know to be true is that they tend to set the standard for the nation. And
Mm-hmm.
you are seeing similar changes in other states with regard to passing legislation in with respect to marijuana for sure. And I think it's going to take some time, but it would not surprise me if decriminalizing drugs and or making drug charges follow a non-traditional criminal justice alternative path is
Mm-hmm.
probably going to be one of the more progressive steps we see during the Biden administration, simply because of his personal background with his son having a drug addiction and him
Yeah.
knowing that it's a treatment issue, and him wanting to pass reform and or funding for alternative programs. Now, whether or not every state is going to eventually decriminalize all drugs, I think that's yet to be said, and it's probably something 10 or 20 years down the road. But I will say this is Oregon will monitor this legislation and how it's enacted and how it progresses with some solid nonpartisan statistical information that can be extrapolated to other states through the National Criminal Justice Statistics organization, and it'll be interesting to watch. It's certainly one of the more progressive pieces of legislation that's ever come out of Oregon, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that we can't get governments, both state and federal, on board with some of these thoughts and philosophies, because they've always been in the drug business and they know it's big money. Yeah. And so, so long as we can bridge the gap between the economic accountability and the societal norms, and we have more social psychologists that are willing to do the research, the network research, to see if the change can occur within the cohorts of people that are actually doing the drugs. I think that we could potentially see a lot of change in this area. But again, you brought up a really good point about, Kiki, about where you draw the line, and I think what we can say for the most part is that the suggestion of drawing the line at somewhere along the age of the brain development is probably an active and progressive step forward and a good jumping off point to reform or refine the legislation of decriminalizing drugs. And so, making that age more around the age of 25 to 27 might be a way to help ensure that, it doesn't become a public health problem as opposed to a public health resolution, So Kiki, where can people find us online?
Okay, so we have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and it's called The Progressive Talk, at The Progressive Talk on all platforms. So for Facebook, you can just search up The Progressive Talk and you should find it. And then Twitter and Instagram, same thing, at The Progressive Talk. So yes, that is our social media, and you can contact us there and maybe even drop some information or ideas that you would like us to talk about. So
and just to say, that we'll be posting. Hang on, we'll stop for a second. I'll let them bark for a minute.
Oh.
Stop. We'll be posting information and resources and oh brother, okay, hang on. Quiet. We'll be posting information and resources, newspaper articles on point with respect to the podcast today, on our social media account, and as always, like we said at the beginning, we want to get you involved. If you got an idea, share it with us. If you're outraged, tell us your story. If you need resources, call us. If you have a comment, post it. And and we love to hear from you. And no story is too small. We want to know what your personal experiences are, and we want to help you if you need it, and we want to hear what you got to say. We're going to take one commercial break, and we'll come back and sign off for the day.
All right.
Okay, so we're back. It's Slim and Kiki, and to close out the podcast, our very first podcast today, which was very successful, all I'm going to tell you is be the change you want to see in the world. What do you got to say, Kiki?
All progress is possible with faith and hope. So keep that hope, everyone.
And believe in humanity. Our topic next week is a heavy one. It's the death penalty in America. There's a lot to talk about, a lot of new federal legislation that Trump is passing as a lame duck president that is affecting people that are on federal death row right now. And he has killed more people in the last few months of his presidency than we have seen in almost 30 years on federal death row. So we will be preparing our minority report on that, and we look forward to hearing from you. And make it a great day. Have a great day, people.